Hello and welcome to the Grumpy Sound Guy Show. I am your host, Mr. J.R. Everhart from CLP Audio and Staging. This week, we are going to dive into a whole bunch of QSC amplifier conversation, and we're also going to talk about, this is basically, this bottom rack is basically my rack for my KF850 rig. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the fear and trembling that most novice middle market guys have about actually putting a system together like this, and probably why they are using powered stuff. I'm not against powered stuff. I'm just saying, in the world of active or powered versus point source or versus passive, you get a lot more bang for your buck out of passive, and we're going to explore all the avenues of that today and talk a lot about how this 850 rig is set up. This is just the rack for the tops. The other rack that you're used to seeing me use, I can't speak today for some reason, is usually just the sub and monitor rack for that same rig. So we're going to dive into all that. We're going to have all that kind of conversation. We're going to talk about the fear and trembling of actually having to know how to tune your own system and tune it in an intelligent manner to get maximum SPL for your buck. So do not run away. You don't want to miss a second of today's show. Hey guys, if I could just have a moment of your time to talk to you about this channel. 49.8% of you guys watching this right now is not subscribed to this channel. Will you please hit that subscription button? It doesn't cost anything to subscribe to the channel on the public side here. And then that gives us tools and resources and for my marketing team to be able to do what we need to do to get this content out to people who really enjoy this sort of thing. The other thing is, if you're super digging this and you'd like a deeper look into my world, then subscribe to the paid side of the YouTube channel. You can join for about the cost of a cup of coffee a month, and then I do vlogs over there. I post content that never goes public, and I let you into my world. I let you into the CLP audio world, and I let you see what our day-to-day life looks like. Love you guys. Thank you for the support. Hello, and welcome back. And so let's just have a conversation about QSC power amps first, okay? Because I think they are the unsung hero of the middle market. Honestly, I do. Especially these PLX amps, the Powerlight series amps, which is a step above the PLX. And really the biggest difference in those, to my knowledge, I'm sure there's going to be a spec junkie somewhere in the comments section that's going to point out 35 different things in the transformer that's, a whisker hair different between the two. But I'm telling you, from my experience, the biggest difference between the PLX line amps and the Powerlight, the PL line amps, is that the PL line amps have a lot more features of how you can set the amp up, how you can daisy chain them together, things like that. More pro touring type features, to where the PLX amps are typically a little more scaled down, with features. But the power unit, I've had all these amps apart and looked at them side by side. I can't see much of a difference on the power side of it. I think it's about the same power. I do know that the Powerlight series offers you bigger power and bigger numbers, like they're maybe turning the technology up some. So that's to be expected out of a flagship model amplifier. You don't see a whole boatload of this stuff nowadays, mainly because everyone's kind of went active in the middle market. It's easier to buy, 6 or 8, HDL 6s or 10s or something like that to do your gig, and then all this system, setup and design is already built into the box. It's the same reason why you guys are using all those turbo sound active boxes, QSC active box. EV is super popular because they're less expensive. I'm not a big fan of any of the new EV stuff. They kind of hoard themselves out to China years ago, and they have not regained their former glory from the QRX days, as far as I'm concerned, or the MTL, days. Those you guys that are sub junkies know those model numbers. Sadly, most of the guys that I'm competing with in the club scene are too young to even understand all this. They're too young to have ever heard a system put together this way and how good it can sound. And let me also say, in past videos when I've compared active to passive speakers, I think a whole bunch of you guys are envisioning like QSC K12 speakers against some kind of line array setup. Well, there's no comparison there. The line array is going to win every day of the week. That's never what I'm talking about. The problem is some of you guys are so young, you don't remember legit passive stuff. The SRX line that you hear me talking about all the time, the 700 series stuff, dude, they were not the flagship of their day, EV QRX, I think, was probably a little bit better, especially in reproducing, high end, a little more smoother, and that sort of thing. And when you compare it to any of the EAW KF line, it's night and day. My favorite stuff to mix on point source is the EAW KF stuff. I own a KF 850 rig. I have 4 KF 850 EF, and then I have 4 SB 850Zs, which are basically the same thing as an SB 1000, just in a trap box. Doesn't quite go as low because of the enclosure and stuff like that, but there still will knock the skin clean off your face, kind of subs. So don't pass them up if you run into a good deal on a pair. Just make sure they got original drivers in them and someone didn't, load them with like PV lowriders or something. I'm actually looking at, I've really been, like I have been saying for months and maybe over a year now, been thinking about buying a line array, and I just cannot bring myself to spend $60,000 and $70,000 on a line array when for probably $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 I know where there's a bunch of KF 650Zs right now with ATA rolling cases in great shape, came out of a church. And dude, if I put 4 of them over top of 4 subs on each side of the stage on like scaffolding, or even if I flew like 3 of them on my stage and did 3 pair of my JBL subs, it's I'm sorry, dude, it's gonna give your line array a run for its money. I'm telling you right now, because especially the middle market plastic box plate amplifier line array, you're gonna have your hands full. It was always common knowledge, and I made this statement, I don't know, 6 videos ago, and made someone mad, and they ended up blocking me because I made this statement, because they're thinking about K12s. They're thinking about all this active plastic box point source stuff that's out now. They're not thinking, they're not old enough to understand or have played through a KF 850 rig. But in KF 850 world, it has always been common knowledge that it takes 3 of your middle market line array boxes to be as loud as one of my KF 850 tops. You bump that down to the 650s. The 650s are loaded with basically the same setup as the 850. It's just a shallower box and weighs about half as much, so they're a lot easier to move around. But dude, I'm telling you right now, it would take at least, I'm gonna be very conservative with this number, and you old cats, older dinosaur guys, believe me, they're calling me dinosaurs with this stuff too, can attest to this. You're gonna have your hands full trying to keep up with that rig. Now, is it gonna throw 400 feet? It'll throw 400 feet enough for someone to enjoy the band. But I'm telling you, the first 120 to 150, 160 feet, I mean, look at what Danley's doing with point source. They're throwing 1,000 feet in some of these stadiums with point source. That's the kind of point source technology I'm talking about. That's the kind of point source technology that's built into this 850 stuff. They put 850s in stadiums for years and years and years. Bands like, AC/DC and Aerosmith and all your favorite iconic bands probably played through an 850 rig at some point or another in a stadium somewhere. Clair Brothers built their whole world on point source. And anybody who's anybody in this business on that level will sit and tell you in a second that point source always sounds warmer and more natural, more musical than any line array that you're going to throw at it, okay? Now, I know they've come a long way, L-Acoustics and D&B. Let me tell you something, I've mixed on some of those rigs. It's mind-blowing. It really is. But you're talking about $6,000 a box, for that stuff. It's crazy, stupid, insane, mind-blowingly expensive. For a guy to just get into a plastic box line array, you're talking about, 20 grand? Something like that, 18 to 22 grand, somewhere in that ballpark, to hang 6 boxes aside of whatever middle market line array you want to pick. It's expensive. Right now, I'm staring down the barrel of 10 KF650Zs for what is about $300 a box, $350 a box. And they've never been abused, never been toured, with ATA cases, it's hard to not take advantage of the technology. It's just a mountain of education that you have to bring to the table to convince people and let people understand that you're not going to show up with a K12 rig, okay? You're going to show up with a KF850 rig or a KF650 rig, or even the QRX and the SRX was like, they were head to head. And EV guys that are like real Electro-Voice guys from back in the day, they will tell you, dude, even the Cobra system and the XA systems that they came up with, Dynacord is owned by Electro-Voice, if you didn't know that. That's kind of their little pet project. They used to call that Cobra system ground stack line array, and it was just a point source system is all. It was just a horn-loaded point source system. But now everybody's got line array on the brain, so that I will digress. I'm not going to go back through all that kind of stuff. I just felt like from some of the roasting comments that I got over the active versus passive content, I needed to come back to that and state that the passive speakers you're thinking about are not the same passive speakers I'm thinking about. We are not the same, my friend, okay? I am bringing much bigger, more efficient technology to the table. Are they a little heavier? Sure they are. Sure they are. But would you rather lift, if you're going to fly, let's say you're going to fly, 6 HDL10s per side. They're what, 30 pounds a box, something like that, 35 pounds a box. Do the math, dude. So that's what, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, that's 180 pounds, 200 pounds with cabling. I can hang 3 of these KF650s and be at 400 pounds. So how is it harder to move? It's on wheels. You just bring it up to where you're going to fly it, put the fly bar on it, and up it goes. How's that any harder than having to sit there and put, line array together, 2 boxes at a time or whatever, 3 boxes at a time or 1 box at a time? I can get my SRX rig up in the air as fast or faster than anybody with a line array. It's 2 boxes per side, dude. I got a fly bar, clicks on them in literally 6 seconds, and we're chain hoisting up. So these arguments about, man, they're so much bigger and heavier and all that kind of stuff, well, all they've done is kind of chop the weight down into little more manageable, chunks. And I get that. I know ease of use is a huge, huge selling point, okay? But let's dive into more of what we're trying to get to today. So QSC, in my mind, and if you work for QSC and you're watching this, I'm going to apologize in advance because you're probably not going to like what I got to say. Although if you just stick around, there's some positive light at the end of the tunnel. I always took this PLX line to be, a poor man's Crown amp. Crown has always been kind of the flagship that middle market guys, especially in passive days, that middle market guys wanted to use. It's still some of my favorite stuff. I own a bunch of Crown, stuff, modern I series, amplifiers. QSC was always more of a budget amp that put out legit power and was super dependable. I mean, if you treat them right and you didn't abuse them and you gave them good electricity from the wall on the AC side, they would last you a lifetime, you know? And you can pick up a lot of these PLX amps used on like reverb.com or something like that for, you know, $300 or $400 a piece. You know, I mean, this is all about money. Are you figuring that out yet? Like, that's what I'm really trying to get through to you guys, is that this is about ROI, man, return on investment, the money that you put into it. It needs to make sense that that gear is paying for itself. If it's not, you have a hobby, not a business. Let me say it again. If your gear is not paying for itself with clients that want you to bring that gear to their gigs and going to pay you to bring it there, then you have a hobby, not a career. Then your day job is paying for your equipment, not your pro audio business. My pro audio business pays for 100% of all of my equipment. That's why I'm not quick to go jump off the diving board into the deep end of 70 grand worth of line array, you know? I mean, I'm not saying that I won't ever own a line array. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying there's other ways. There's more than one way to skin a goose. And if we can get, you know, promoters and bands and these people who insist on line array that have no idea what a line array even is, if we can get them to understand that there's more than one way to shoot a concert than line array. Especially, did I mention especially? In the middle market. Look, if you're a pro touring guy and you're doing arenas and you're doing crowds over, you know, 8,000, 10,000 people all the time and all that kind of jazz, hey man, you should own a line array. That's what it's made for. It's about the right tool for the right job. But the people that I'm talking to in my content are middle market guys. They're guys that are either busting their rear end on their day job to be able to afford to buy gear to at least go out and have any hope of making money with their equipment, or they're guys like me who have invested decades of their life to this, you know, industry and have nickel and dimed my way into having enough inventory to do the things that I need to do. Look, some of my most successful competitors were not guys that just jumped off the boat and onto the flavor of the week gear. QSC is a great example of that. These PLX amps, they're working man's amps, man. They just get it done. So what we have going on here is from here down, this bottom rack, we'll talk about this in a minute, okay? But from here down is the amp rack for my 850 rig. This is the tops. The other rack that has all the crowns in it, and a passive crossover, very much like that crossover there. Because that crossover is actually going in this. We're going to build this for a club rig. I'm going to explain that to you here in a minute. We're using a drive rack 260 here. This is a 4-way system. So the tops are 3-way, high, mid, low. And then we aux feed the sub. So that's why the amps for the subs are in a different rack. But the way this works is we are powering each part of the box individually. It's called triamp in that box. Well, you say triamp, JR, but you got 4 amplifiers here. Okay. Well, what we're doing is we're trying to make the math work correctly for when we daisy chain 2 speakers together on each side. So because of that, that means we have to do a little bit of math, basic math, okay? So if I have 2 8-ohm loads that I'm going to parallel together, that gives me 4 ohms. So if those speakers are rated at 1200 watts at 8 ohms, I need to add 1200 times 2, that's 2400 watts at 4 ohms. Because now that's what my amp's going to see. So on the low side, I said those exact numbers that I just gave you goes exactly with the 15-inch driver that represents a low in the KF850. I have a PLX 3002 in bridge mode. So in bridge mode at 4 ohms, I need 2400 watts. It's going to give me about 3000 watts. So that gives me some overhead there. The more overhead you have in your system, the more fidelity you can get out of it, because you're not driving your amps, you know, crazy. If you drive your amps crazy hard, you sacrifice fidelity, you sacrifice frequency response, signal to noise ratio starts to rise, dampening factor changes. There's a lot of things that go into that scenario. So I always overshoot those numbers so I don't have to drive it to death to get the volume that I want out of the rig. So that's why there's 2 amps on the bottom for low. It's low left and low right. And they're 2 PLX 3002s in bridge mode. They'll be running 4 ohms to the low 215s on each side, 115 in each box. And then there's a PL230 that represents the mid-range, and then a PLX 1602 to represent the horns. The horns never take more than 75 to 150 watts, you know, so you don't really need a whole lot, and it doesn't take much to reproduce high end. High end will reproduce very efficiently, especially in these EAW boxes. The thing I like most about this KF stuff is it's super efficient, which means you don't have to push Mongo crazy lab grouping power at it or PowerSoft power at it to get it to do what you want it to do. It was created to produce high volume, you know, output at lower wattage by using professional grade drivers, using enclosures that that amplify everything that's right about that frequency bandwidth. And believe me, EAW back in the day had some of the best engineers on the planet when it comes to this stuff. In fact, some of the guys that went off to start other companies started at EAW, you know, and ended up shooting off and starting their own companies. So yeah, and then we use the Drive Rack 260 to manage all that. So then you say, okay, JR, why don't you have a UX8800, you know, an EAW processor, which has the Genius feature that is made for the 850s and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff now. And there's one real simple answer. It always comes back to money, guys. I got $400 in that. I bought it used for $400. It has worked flawlessly for 4 years. It's so cheap that I'm tempted to buy a second one just in case that was to go down. I'd have a backup on site. To where the UX8800 is like $1,500 used. They don't make them anymore, so you got to find one that's hasn't been abused and, you know, beat to death. Yes, I know that's the processor for this rig, but if you come hear my system, I have this set up to EAW spec. So I went to the EAW website, to their archive stuff, and I got all of the processor settings from EAW. I hooked the laptop up to the 260 here, and I just punched in all those numbers. And I mean, the system came out right out of the box was like 98% where I wanted it to be. I actually had to go up and turn down the horns, really because this PLX 1602 is a little much for those horns, and I don't want to blow the horns. So I ended up having to come up and actually get in the processor and tame those down some. And then obviously we can use multi-band compression in there. We got another house third octave EQ in there. I mean, you guys know what's in a drive rack, you know. It gets it done. And then we aux feed the subs into the other rack that you usually see setting here. That rack, see, this whole system, I never built CLP Audio to do club stuff. That was never the goal, you know. I started doing club stuff because COVID happened. We were all starving to death, and we had to do something to stay alive, you know. So what I did was I took my sub/monitor rack, amp rack, and I started throwing it in a little 6x12 trailer with a control rack, and that became my club amp rack, you know. I use that rack to this day, even with the SRX system that I fly with the stage. Excuse me, there's just enough power there to be able to do that. There's 4 5000 eyes in there, Macrotech 4000 eyes. That was meant for four pair of subs. And then there's 8 channels of like AdMark level Chinese amps that we use for, you know, 6 monitor wedges or 8 monitor wedges or whatever we need to do with that. That's what that rack was originally designed for, because this was going to handle the tops. And we were basically going to just use the 850 rig wherever we went. Well, you know, we've never really fully recovered from, you know, from COVID that way, you know, and it got to the point to where people were more concerned about budget than what they were about the gear you were bringing out, at least to some degree. So the SRX stuff just made sense because it's lighter, easier to deploy. People love it, all that kind of stuff. I was really only using the 850 rig for one big major outdoor gig per year. And the rig is paid for, so it's not hurting anything. It's sitting in the trailer, you know what I mean? And then we ended up losing that event because they hired another event manager who had their own production people. We didn't lose it because we did anything wrong. We just lost it because management changed and they wanted to bring their own people in. So now the rig is just kind of setting. And look, I'm just like the rest of you guys. I don't like carrying, those are 300-pound boxes. I don't like carrying those things around any more than I have to. I hate stacking them. It takes 3 people to stack them. Really 4 if you really want to be safe about it. So that's why I was kind of leaning into this 650Z rig that I'm looking at, because they're much they're 135 pounds a box instead of 270 pounds a box, and they can do just about the same thing that the 850 rig can do. The 850 rig can throw a little further, but the 650s can get it done, man. And honestly, I'm still sitting here looking at my calendar like no one is really giving me a hard time about not having a line array. I've had one client in the last 5 years who wouldn't hire me because I didn't have a line array. And I tried to tell her, about the 850 rig and how they're only doing like 1,500 people at this gig. We could easily do that with the 850 rig. And she just wasn't having it. She was line array or no array. And look, I get it, guys. That's the world we live in, and those are the parameters that we have to work under. But everyone that comes to my shows are just blown away at how warm and fat and crystal clear that the mix is, and when I go see these other guys with these plastic box line arrays in the middle market, I'm not really hearing that same kind of mix. And I'm not saying it's because I'm this, I'm the who's who of, sound engineers. It's the system, dude, it's the system. And I see guys that are trying to get in the line array and really can't afford it. They really don't have the money to do line array correctly. So they skimp and they buy a box smaller than what they really need. And then they get out on these gigs and they're pushing them to, clip all the time for hours and hours at a time. And now they're starting to see amp failures, driver failures, stuff like that. I can't tell you the last time that I had any of my big point source stuff go down on me. I had a couple 715 SRX 715 boxes go down. Both boxes probably had 25 years worth of usage on them. So it wasn't a shocker that we needed to do some work to them after 25 years. Yeah, you're gonna have to replace the driver every now and then. In the member video this week, we went through one of my Yamaha monitor wedges and replaced the 12-inch driver and the horn diaphragm, and we had that whole conversation. Here's a monitor wedge that's got probably 20 years of usage on it, and we're just now replacing, we're putting $200 worth of components in it in 20 freaking years, dude. Show me somebody else who's getting that kind of longevity out of their plastic box line array stuff in the middle market. I don't know a bunch of dudes getting that. I know some guys that's got, 5, 6, maybe even 7 years on, some newer, like an HDL20 rig or something like that. Maybe they were indoors in a controlled environment where they could keep everything cool, and that made a big difference. Maybe they're really good engineers and didn't overdrive the system to death, and that's why it's lasted that long. All those things matter. The thing about passive and this stuff that I'm using is you can really hammer it, man, and usually not have driver failure, usually not lose any amplifiers. The nice thing about these kind of amplifiers is when they get hot, they just shut off for 30 seconds. They don't just keep pushing until they burn themselves up. And they have fans inside of them to help keep them cool. And then if I'm out on a hot day, I always put high CFM fans on all my amp racks. I know which direction air is coming into them from and all that kind of jazz, and I put a fan behind them or in front of them, whatever it takes, and I help promote airflow. And I just rarely, even on these 100-degree days, 120-degree heat index kind of days, rarely ever have an amp go into thermal. You don't have any of that. kind of technology for the most part in a lot of these plastic boxes. You just don't. And QSC has been absolutely wonderful with these amplifiers. They just have, man. They just last forever. I mean, every now and then you'll get a knob that's a little kind of thing. Man, pull this knob off, take some contact cleaner and spray in there, and then put a little lube in, behind it. You're good for another 5 years. You know what I'm saying? Like, the only people I've seen where these amps have really taken a beating has been in nightclubs back when there was smoking in nightclubs. Nicotine is a cancer to all electronics. I think we all know that. Dust is a cancer to all electronics. I used to do a house gig, at a place that had a KF850 rig and had all QSC power. And I don't know, I was there about a year and I was like, I'm going to pull these amps out and kind of see what's going on with them, assuming that whoever was there before me had serviced them. No one had serviced them, man. And I took literal shovels full of dust bunnies and dirt out of those amplifiers. And I mean, just absolutely resurrected the amps. They ran cooler after that. They sounded better, warmer, fatter. It's amazing how clean the power is when it's getting proper airflow. QSC did a wonderful job with that. Those PLX 3602s, those things are super crazy popular. I know a bunch of guys running SRX 728s, and they're running a 3602 in bridge mode on each sub, and those things will pound. I mean, pound, dude, pound. So, I said all that to also say this. I have seen this line of amps fail. And let me tell you why they fail, because it's not rocket science, okay? And it has come from abuse. DJs. Much as I hate to say it, man, I'm not anti-DJ. I'm just telling you, DJs, dude. DJs could destroy a rubber ball. If you gave them a rubber ball, they would push that mug to it was on fire, because they never know, they never have any boundaries of what is loud enough or what's too loud, and most of them aren't educated enough to know what a speaker sounds like when you're overdriving it. Or they're behind the speakers and can't even hear what's going on with it. They're just pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, So I have seen a bunch of QSC amps, Crown amps, Lab Groupings, PowerSoft, Carvin back in the day, PV amps. I'm trying to think of every amp manufacturer on the top of my brain here. I've seen them all fail at the hands of DJs, or at the hands of someone who just didn't know what they were doing, and someone who wasn't giving the amp enough AC power and asking it to do things that it can't do without proper electrical flow, or they're getting plenty of AC power and they're just pushing the amp beyond its limits because they don't have their system configured correctly. So there is no, holy grail of gear that is just never going to fail. But if you want to compare ROI to ROI, dude, the ROI on point source is going to smoke the ROI on line array any day of the week. And you're not really in the middle market, you're not going to really notice that. I mean, does it really mean so much to your ego to be known as the one guy in town who has a line array rig, who, and your band or your company is mainly working in the animal circuit? When I can go into them clubs with an SRX rig and do everything and more than what you can do with way, way less money and gear and way easier gear to get what I want from it. I'm not having to push the gear to 11 all the time. I can push the gear to 6 or 7 and get the same sound pressure level and still have all the laws of fidelity working in my favor. This top rack is going to be what I'm kind of like toying with this. The summer season is starting to calm down now, so now I'm kind of getting in winter project mode. And I am considering buying a pair of Yamaha DZR 15s They're wooden powered tops, point source tops. And then I have a pair of VRX 918 single 18 subs here at the shop. So what I'm thinking about is making this just a sub rack. You know, I have a PLX 3002 right here. If you want to know more about these amps, by the way, make sure you join the subscription side, become a Grumpy Insider, because last week's member video, we tore these very amps apart, and I did a full service on them and showed you exactly what goes on in these amps, how to clean them, how to keep airflow going, how to keep them working, what to look for when you buy one. Like, I don't ever buy one of these and bring them home unless I open them up and look at them, because I know the failure points in them. We went through all that last week on the member side. For the price of a cup of coffee, dude, you could be in that group getting that kind of information. But what's going to happen here is I'm going to take this drawer out, move this power strip to the top, put this crossover in here, and then I have a panel that I am going to make that will be aux in, and then it's just going to be one line out, one NL4 out, because the way this will work is this is going to be in bridge mode, and I will daisy chain those two single 18s together, and that'll give me about 1,500 watts per box on those. And considering they're loaded with 600 watt drivers, that's more than enough to make them do whatever I want them to do. And that will be, then I'll be able to take that big amp rack you see me hauling around all the time out of the trailer for the winter club season and just use this. Like I said before, man, I never built CLP Audio to be a club production company. We are really just taking those dates because we enjoy the bands we work with. We gravitate toward the bands that have a legitimate budget and see our value and reward that financially. And it fills the calendar out and it keeps us busy, you know? So I'm trying to figure out a way to do that sort of configuration in a more efficient manner. And I don't want to spend $5,000 in powered stuff to do it. I already have this stuff. What I said last week in that member video when we were going through these QSCs, I got two PLX 3002s, this crossover, this rack mount power strip, a rat hair rolling amp rack that I actually have for sale for $50 or $75 or something. If you're looking for a decent rat hair, you know, covered rolling rack, let me know. I'll hook you up. I bought all that stuff for $500. And there was another amp over here that we actually did service, and then when we plugged it up, it caught on fire. Was by far the most entertaining thing we've had here in the shop in a very, very long time. It's a Ross series MTA 1200. It's sitting over here on the floor. Yeah, we didn't really lose much. Let me just put it to you that way. I had actually toyed with the idea of maybe I'd put a couple PV-PR12s up here in the shop and run a Bluetooth receiver into that amp and just use it as like a little shop system here so I could listen to podcasts, and I do a lot of audiobooks and stuff like that and everything. But when we plugged it in, it gave us the best fireworks show that we have seen in many, many years. So that was very entertaining. It's now a conversation piece here in the shop. So I got all that for $500. 2 amps. That crossover is like $175 new. It looks like it has no time on it whatsoever. Yeah, we'll aux feed into this rack. That will power the subs. And then the DZR15s will be our tops. They're powered, so we don't need amps for that. And then behind this rack, I have a cart with 4 of the DHR12 coax Yamaha monitor wedges, powered monitor wedges. They're also wooden. So that should be a nice little, you know, little club rig. You know what I'm saying? Like, nothing crazy. I've been dragging double 18s in clubs now for 5 years, and I'm just like, I mean, sometimes it's really cool. I'm not going to say it's not, because I can make all your low-end fantasies come true. Most of the time, it's overkill. Okay, it really is, especially at some of these dock bars where we're really, really struggling for power, you know, and that sort of thing. So it is what it is. So that's what the top rack is going to be. I'm into the amp for probably $175 if you break all that down. probably into the crossover for 75 bucks. I already had the rack. That power conditioner is probably 75 or 80 bucks new, you know, because it's a rack rider. It's not a Furman, but that's okay. It has lights that come out on it, and the lights work, which is super cool. But that should make a cool little club rig, you know. But again, there'll be no system processor with that. The same way I have no system processor with my big SRX rig. Now, when I take the 850 rig out, we're using a drive rack. We do have a system processor with that. Anytime I'm 3- and 4-way system kind of set up and got that hat on, there's always a system processor in place because you need help with that. But if I'm just running, you know, a club where the tops are full range and I'm just kind of high pass filtering, you know, up to about 70 or 80 hertz or something on the tops, and then my subs are crossed over at like 70, it works, dude, and it gets it done. We've been in the shorts this week talking about sub stuff. That conversation has been interesting, to say the least. We're finally starting to, I really kicked the apple cart over this week in that series and started pulling the covers off some industry lies that have been part of the equation for a very long time. So I think people are starting to see the writing on the wall and starting to understand that, hey, maybe the old dinosaur JR Grumpy Sound Guy knows what the hell he's talking about after all. You young cats, dude, you just don't know what you don't know. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I feel sorry for you that you grew up in a time where you didn't know. We got a squirrel, dude. Where's he at? I got a squirrel here in the shop. This is like he's as popular as I am in my videos. He's been trying to build a nest right here over the door. Usually he did it back there in the shop last year. I had a follower said, hey man, look at like 1236 on your video and there's a squirrel running in the rafters behind you. But yeah, we have wildlife here in West Virginia. Are you feeling my ADD yet? Hey look, a squirrel. But yeah, he's barking at me. He's a jerk, dude. I'm telling you right now, he's full on jerk. Full on jerk. Anyways, I don't even know what the hell I was talking about now. Oh, getting beat up in the more sub talk series. I'm growing to a point now where, first of all, there's more comments than I can keep up with, and second of all, I'm really focusing a lot of my attention toward members and subscribers over on Facebook and here on YouTube, and really only giving my one-on-one time and stuff to those guys. And I just don't have time to set everybody straight anymore. You know, I used to sit online for hours and hours at a time and explain my theories, explain my methodology, explain why the industry has lied to you, explain how things changed when China manufacturing took over the industry, and most of you guys aren't even old enough to even know what life was like before that. Like, we're living in a time now where there's guys coming out of college and coming out of sound school today, tomorrow, in the spring, whenever they graduate, and they have never heard what a really good, tuned, well-designed, well-powered point source system sounds like at a big outdoor show. They didn't go to those concerts, okay? They just didn't. I can remember going to a big outdoor place right down the street here from where I live at, here in West Virginia. There's an old pig farmer that turned a field into a big concert venue, and it was the shiznit. Let me just tell you right now, life did not get any better in rock and roll than what it was at Shiley Acres. You know, so that was what it was. And DSL Sound was their guy back in the 70s and 80s there. I think they were using a lot of in-house built stuff. They were also using a lot of Meyer stuff in those days. Meyer was super huge. And dude, it was some of my fondest memories of pro audio. You know what I mean? Like, just being able to sit there next to front of house and listen to rock and roll in its truest form, and being musical and organic, and fidelity being in its correct place. And they would get 8,000 and 10,000 people in that venue all the time. Not one person ever walked away from that venue and said that the sound sucked. Not during the 70s and 80s, even into the early 90s. Not one person would leave there and say, oh, I couldn't hear the band. I didn't think the band was loud enough. No, most of them had their ears ringing and just had the time of their friggin' life, dude. I mean, but you know, that goes back to a time before most of you guys that are watching this were even born. So I'm not mad at you when you want to argue with me, because you don't understand where I'm coming from, because you weren't there to experience the heyday of point source. And I'm all about the heyday of line array that's happening now. But I don't think it's economically feasible for the middle market sound guy. I don't know, unless you're doing, you know, big gigs with big crowds and you got big corporate budgets and, you know, you want to cover a room with line array instead of point source, a ballroom, hey man, more power to you. I'm not mad at you. You do you, boo. It's all good. But what I'm trying to do is save a whole bunch of you people money. I've had followers get mad at me, unfriend me, block me, call me every name in the book, because in watching my content, the light came on and they realized that they probably just spent 10 grand on line array they didn't need, when they could have probably spent 3 or 4 grand and got a point source system that does the exact same thing and probably does it better. One guy said he was calling me out on my early 2000s silliness, to which I respond, it's like early 90s silliness, so get it right. Mid 90s silliness, I'll give you that. Anyways, yeah, dude, that's the deal. QSC, PLX amps are great. The PL380 is probably the flagship big boy on the block of their Powerlight line. All their 3 series is their newest stuff. I know they're making 4-channel amps now. They've branched out into a lot of new, more modern style amps and that sort of thing. But if you're looking to put together a passive rig and need really good power, don't be afraid to buy these PLX amps or the PL2 series or the PL3 series. They're all great, fabulous amps. Just make sure you make the seller prove to you that they work before you buy them, especially if it's coming from a DJ or some kind of weekend warrior or something like that. I got lucky when I bought these amps 2 weeks ago. It was coming from a guy who was mixing a country band, and it was actually a friend of his father who had passed away, and all this gear was kind of left behind, and now they're liquidating gear. And the fact that this stuff isn't super popular really plays into your wheelhouse financially, because the demand isn't super high. You can get into some of this gear really cheap. You know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, these same amps were going for $600, $700, $800 a piece. Now they're going for $300 or $400 a piece. I think I seen a 3602 used on Reverb today for like $450, $500 or something like that. Dude, the deals are out there, man. They really, really are. But everybody's kind of running to the world of active, so let that play those things to your advantage. Be smart. You know, don't fall into the qualms of, you know, I got to have, you know, the flavor of the week gear. Yeah. So, if you have made it this far in the video, you should be a grumpy insider, because 80% of you guys are gone, and I'm only talking to the 20% that actually understand the message I'm trying to bring forth, understand my heart, which is to save you money and to try to get you to buy gear that will last for 10 years, you know, that you don't have to replace every 3 to 5 years or something like that. That's my goal. You get that. You are my people. Dude, it's like $5 to $7 a month to be a grumpy insider, depending on which package you want to buy. And then you get to have access to all those member-only videos where, you know, like today we went through that monitor wedge, replaced the 12, replaced the diaphragm and the horn, had a ton of conversation about Yamaha wedges, the things I like about them, the things I don't like about them. Last week we went through these QSC amps, did a service job on them, showed you how all that works. It's all stuff you can do at home, man. It's not super, super hard stuff, you know? And I'm trying to save you money and keep your gear working for you for many, many years. My goal is for everyone to win. I want everyone to make money with whatever it is you're using. If you're using plastic boxes with plate amplifiers and you're making money, I'm for you. I'm not against you. I am not your enemy. I'm just saying, before you go buy all that, Just take what I'm saying into consideration. Go talk to some guys that you know are legit sound guys in your area and ask them their opinions about point source. Ask them their opinions about plastic versus wooden boxes and stuff like that. What you'll find is the arguments that people bring to the table about ease of use and lightweight gear and all that kind of stuff is really only like about 25 or 30% better than what it was when we were using all wooden boxes and passive gear. It just is what it is. I have a buddy of mine who swore to God he would never carry one of them boat anchor amp racks around. And guess what he's doing now? He bought himself some passive point source wooden boxes, and now he's carrying an amp rack around. You know why? Because he started to listen to what I was telling him, and he started to experiment with it, and he found out real quick that it's way, way more efficient, way cheaper, and the bands like it because it's just a better mix all around. If you get that and that makes sense to you, please consider being an insider. Please consider getting behind the message that I'm trying to put out here and show some support to the old Grumpster. And I also am only making myself available for one-on-one private messaging to subscribers only, unless you're a paying client, obviously. But if you're someone who just wants to contact me and talk shop, that's not going to happen unless you're a subscriber. And you need to mention that when you send me a message, and I will go and check the subscription list and make sure you are who you say you are. And then we'll have a grand old time talking about whatever you want to talk about. At my convenience, obviously. I mean, I can't walk away from paying work, to have those conversations. But I make myself very available to the subscribers, and I prioritize them above public viewers. So, love you guys. I'll see you next week.